Action.
Hi, I'm Jackson Hare. We're here at Element 41 for the Human Library event. The goal was to have some expert guests with us, these panelists to my left and right, to come speak with everyone and share their experiences to hopefully help educate everybody in the spirit of Pride Month. So on my right, there's Chris Steigerwald, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, I am Chris Steigerwald. I am the board president and one of the founding members of a group called GIAGA, SOGI Support Network. SOGI stands for Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, and that's what this topic all boils down to, are those two areas. I previously retired from the field of social work and child development and had always worked with youth, although this topic really wasn't an open topic when I was working with youth. And so after I retired, I now have two grandchildren who identify on the LGBTQ spectrum. And I realized by talking with people who I'd formerly worked with, social service agencies, school personnel, that we really needed support and education in this county. And so I brought together a group of people, and we started this group in early 2020, which was not such great timing. So in the last couple of years, our group has really grown. We have support groups for youth, for adults, and we're trying to do as much community education to enlighten people, bring about awareness, and open up this topic for positive discussion.
All right, and on my left is Leslie Kuba. She can go ahead and introduce herself.
Yes, my name is Leslie Kuba, and I am a freelance writer. I write for Cleveland.com and Plain Dealer. I like to tackle subjects that are touching people's lives in Northeast Ohio. I myself am part of the LGBTQ family, and we are living in and living through are getting surprisingly only harder right now. The state of Ohio is becoming a hostile place for LGBTQ, too many letters, LGBTQ people. And so, I work with words, and that's how I try to influence leaders and open people's minds. But, Jackson takes part in like-minded GIAGA and what's going on in the county. Chris obviously leads a giant network of support that does all kinds of providing of resources. No effort is too small. Everyone has something they can contribute. It's going to take a lot of contribution and a lot of work to turn the tide. So that's it. The way I help is by writing.
All right, and then the goal was just to have people ask questions and get some answers from our panelists here and just get a conversation going. So if anybody has any questions.
Oh, I do.
What is your question?
Chris, you said something earlier while we were discussing some things at the table. You're the grandmother of two trans children, and you said one came out when she was 4.
Correct.
That is a point of contention now, as you're aware, that you hear the bigots will say, well, these kids don't even know what they are. People know what they are. How did your granddaughter know?
Well, first of all, having a 1 degree in child development, I would say that gender identity forms and sets between ages 2 and 5. And so although it's more unusual, it's not unheard of to think that a child knows their preferences at a young age. She is a very bright, stubborn, and she just started portraying all female tendencies starting around age 3. She wanted to take dance, and I should clarify, she was assigned male at birth, but I only use the female pronouns now. She wanted to take dance, and when we went to buy the dance shoes and the saleswoman said, well, the boys wear black, she said, no, I want pink. And then she got into the dance class and the other girls had tutus, and she went home and told her mom, I want a skirt to wear. And my daughter said, okay, you can have a skirt. And then in daycare that she went to 2 days a week, they announced, well, next week you can come as a superhero or as a princess. And my granddaughter said, I want to go as a princess. So I don't think that she perceived herself as a male. Now with my other grandchild, it was a different experience, but the more common experience, and that is that when puberty starts, the realization of feeling different. And some people say that even that's too young to know, that at puberty you haven't had any sexual experience, but even heterosexual people can remember back to middle school when they had their first crush on a boy or a girl of the opposite gender, and then the gay or lesbian, or they are like, what's wrong with me? I'm not crushing on the opposite gender, I'm crushing on the same gender. So really, puberty is really a prime time to also figure this out, when the hormones are changing. I think that historically we just suppressed that development in the youth. And now what is happening also is because there's so much more media attention and so many more people in film and TV who are out, there are words to express this and to identify and say, I know what I am. I'm gay, I'm lesbian, I'm bi, I'm trans. So the labels are out there. And the other point I would just throw in is that we have an adult support group. And the adults who come, there are some who are in their 50s and in their 60s who are now just transitioning to another gender. And they go back and they tell stories of memories they have at ages 5 and 6 and 7 of wanting to dress up like the opposite gender, of wanting to play with the opposite gender toys, but their family said, you can't do that. You're not this, you're not that. And so for anyone to say now, it can't happen that early. You go back and you talk to people who are transitioning at an older age, and they have memories from a young age, and they have suffered a great deal through their life, not being able to be, and just thinking there's something wrong with me, because there were no words, there were no labels back then. They didn't know what they were. They just knew they were different, and they felt there was something terribly wrong. So it's very sad to hear their stories.
One thing you mentioned that's very, very relevant to today's culture and the hot topics that we keep hearing about, you said those gender conforming norms. So back when we grew up, and you're a little bit older than I am, but you look much better than I do, so take that as a compliment. But like when we grew up, there weren't girls playing on our baseball teams. There weren't girls playing football. But you see that now, and their parents are like, hey, that's great, my daughter's doing what she wants to do. Gender norms be damned. But when it comes to anything else where those gender norms, it's like men are like, well, why is that boy playing with a doll? Well, the doll is a toy. You've normalized it for one gender, but it's a toy. And girls that want to shoot guns, are they lesbian just because it's typically men that play with guns? Absolutely not. But breaking those gender norms, it's an enormous challenge, but that's where a lot of this has to start.
It is, because they, to break down those gender norms, you really have to look at our country's history and how the binary is so strict and categorized to the point of, women couldn't buy land, women couldn't vote. I mean,
Get a credit card.
Right. There's so many things that were determined by gender, and we need to break all of that down. In our adult support group, we have one mom who has a transgender daughter, and she made the comment, and I just love this, that sexual orientation and gender identity is a buffet now. There's so many things to choose from, and none of it's right and none of it's wrong. You can feel as female as you want and still have an interest in a more typically male activity. But then again, we can all look back and also realize there were kids we grew up with, that we went to school with, who maybe showed some different sexual orientation, gender identity, aspects of their personality, and today they are now identifying in a different way. So we can look back and see some of what we didn't recognize then. But we also just need to be so much more broader and accepting in how someone wishes to identify, how they feel, but what their interests are.
Yeah, I just wanted to add too that the gender binaries that our society is just so ingrained with are so reductive to what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman. And it's more than just playing with toys that boys typically play with and girls typically play with. It's so much more than that, and being a woman should mean more than that, and being a man means way more than that too. And so it's so reductive to say, no, it just means the toys that you're playing with. That's silly to think that. And so that's why the gender binary makes no sense. It's just like cookie cutter, and it doesn't fit everyone.
And it's ironic in a country that prides itself on freedom. But girls, you have to play with dolls. Boys, you have to play with little army men. It's ironic. Leslie, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but you also mentioned something earlier that I'm going to ask you about. And if I'm prying or I'm getting too personal, just smack me, and I'm okay with that. You are lesbian, but you were married and have children.
I was really good at being straight. I'll start first with that I am utterly and entirely thankful for all the chapters in my life. I feel like our trajectories create opportunity, but they also form us as people. And I wouldn't change anything, I don't think. No, I know I would. I grew up at a time where there were no words. I grew up in a place where there were no examples. I must have missed the news on the Stonewall. I don't know how I was completely ignorant, but I was. So I did not know that there was any flexibility in binary, in sexuality, in orientation, anything. And so I just did what I saw was expected and committed to that. And I had a wonderful life, a wonderful married life with my husband, which I learned a new word tonight. Instead of ex-husband, it's husband. I love that. And so I noticed that when my children became more independent, they were young adults, and I had more time on my hands, more space in my life and in my being, that's when my orientation started to emerge. And it's the scariest journey no matter how old you are. I had, at that time, I felt like I had so much that I could lose if I became authentic. And then at one point, you have to cross a line where it doesn't matter what you might lose. You can't lose yourself. And the authenticity has to come through. There's just no other choice. And I'm very fortunate. My family, we had some rough moments, and people need time, and people need support. SOGI offers support, other organizations do too. I'm happy to report that I have good relationships with all of my children, grandchildren, etc. And now, I'm just waiting to see how much my grandchildren get to live beyond the strict terms and definitions and the binary. And I think as human beings are much more flexible than what our patriarchal systems have created. Labeling and dividing people and keeping people in line, it's always been about power, and most power is about money. And you can trace that back for all of time, quite honestly. And I'm just going to keep going with this thought, because I think since that is at the root of many of the things that we're trying to disrupt and reset today, I think that is why state legislators are interfering with people's lives, with parental rights, with education, and much more. I think the chains that hold decision making back to power systems, and at the base of the power, the money systems, until we break through on that, it's going to be hard. But as I said when I introduced myself, we all have something to contribute, and if we all keep contributing, we will make change.
Words to live by. I'm glad you mentioned authentic, because again, we have this irony that the U.S. flag is supposed to represent freedom, but so many people live oppressed under that flag, and you can't see it, but behind us is the reverse side of a pride flag. And that's why that pride flag is so important, because that pride flag is about freedom. It's about allowing people to live their authentic life. Oh, there we go.
We've got some
on the
small
table.
ones right here.
That is the true flag of freedom. The United States
Personal
flag
freedom,
certainly is. I was in the Army, and we learned that the flag, the color of red, was for the blood that was spilled to defend that country and the freedoms we enjoy. But the we is limited. And until we're all free, that flag definitely has to be the flag of the United States, because we aren't all free until we all can live our authentic lives. And so I'm glad you mentioned that word. So I will stop dominating the questions. So
Question. So when we speak about regarding sort of what I would term sort of the oppressive nature of government regarding LGBTQ issues, I think we have some, like we could work, on the ground level, right, with our friends and neighbors. Do you have any advice of how to speak to people who may feel as if, well, this is a moral issue or religious issue, and I must feel this way, right, because I've been told to. Do you have any advice for how to speak to our friends and neighbors regarding that issue?
It's a kind of loaded, complicated question. I think it depends somewhat too on if that person has any willingness to listen and be somewhat open. Some people aren't willing. You might start by saying, well, I've had a personal experience, and what I know of this person who identifies as queer in some way is that they're good people. They're more like us than they're different in any way. They're good people, they're living their lives, they want the same things that we do. I find it hard to feel that they are living their life incorrectly. And then also there are new theologians out there who are looking at the Bible in a different way and interpreting the Bible in a different way, and that the Bible has a lot of different interpretations depending on how you understand the history of what was happening at that time. There's even a lot of just great TED Talks.
Oh, that's a good idea.
TED Talks, if you just look for headings of LGBTQ theologians, listen to people who identify as LGBTQ on TED Talks. There's a Catholic theologian at Ursuline College who did a TED Talk, and she has had a personal experience, and her TED Talk revolves around the fact that there's a lot of biological components involved in people being LGBTQ, and that yes, it's more typical that people are heterosexual, but that doesn't mean we should deny the people who identify as LGBTQ, that the Catholic Church in particular needs to be more flexible in their acceptance of people of different types. And so when I found her TED Talk, I just was like, wow, you know, it's to hear.
What is her name?
Her name is Natalie Kertes, Kertes Weaver, Weaver. And so to hear a Catholic theologian give a TED Talk on accepting was a beautiful thing. And I have watched other TED Talks where other theologians and ministers and pastors have a totally different perspective. And it's just interesting to listen to that if people are willing.
I also wanted to add too that something that's super important, especially because the hate around these issues can just be so loud. It's important that you are much louder than them, and so being visible, always pushing the issue and challenging people that have these negative perspectives on the LGBTQ community. It's, you know, maybe you have a few awkward and uncomfortable holidays, but you should push the question at Thanksgiving dinner as to why, you know, your uncle might not be super friendly towards LGBTQ plus people, and tell them why they need to vote in the next election for a LGBTQ plus affirming candidate, and keep pushing those issues. And it might not happen right away, but eventually something might click in their brain, or you'll strike the chord that needed to be hit, and they'll be like, oh, wait a minute, I have to start really looking into this, because a lot of times you're going to run into people who aren't willing to listen, and you shouldn't waste your time with those people. That's just not, it's not time well spent. So it's making yourself visible, making yourself a resource that the people who do want to learn will come to you, and that's the best thing you can really do.
I'll add something very short. I have never found it very successful to tell somebody they're wrong, to convince them of what's right. So I think there are times where we can, whether it's a TED Talk, whether it's an event, whether it's a place, whether it's a person, we can introduce or expose without all the words, without all the argument. If you get to argument, that conversation's done. It's not going to go anywhere. And I think there's also value in the thoughtful question. You don't have to answer the question. You don't have to provide options for them to answer the question. But questions maybe along the line that they would understand the question. Well, is God love? Do you think God is love? Does God love everyone? And most people who have a strong religious life in the Protestant or Catholic or Jewish vein will say, yes, God is love. Well then, does he love all people? And just keep taking that love line farther and farther to the point where they're going to they're going to eventually say, well, he may love them, but they're wrong. But you've stretched them just that along a line that they do understand. That's all I have. Question behind you.
Yeah, I have a question for the panel. The term, LGBTQIA2S plus is, quite a umbrella term that involves a lot of different individuals. And if you layer intersectionality on top of that, other identities as well, things can get very diverse even within that community. I was wondering if you could highlight some of the difference in experience that members of this community may have, and who may be even more vulnerable within the community that, maybe we need to focus on a little bit more.
Oh man. Another loaded question, because like you said, super diverse community.
It's very good.
And a large array of experiences that are wildly different. I think obviously communities of color that are part of the LGBTQ plus community face different hardships, of course, and with that on top of being a member of the queer community, it's just like twofold. Like they've got so much going against them, and so there's things like that. And I will say, like, I've witnessed like challenges within the community that are like, people call it the oppression Olympics. They're like, oh, but we have this problem because yada yada, and someone will be like, but we are also dealing with this, and people have to realize like that's not doing any good by arguing like who's dealing with the worst. It's just moving towards the same, we all have the same goal of trying to find like safety for everyone and acceptance for everyone and legal and lived equality for everyone. And that becomes a challenge when they're infighting. So it's about acknowledging the different like identities and cultures that are a part of this community and moving forward in intentional steps that benefit all the communities that are involved.
Yeah, have you heard people say, don't eat your own? Conflict within marginalized groups, whether within one group or groups towards each other, does not help anything. I'm going to try and answer the question in that it doesn't take too much listening or observing to start to see how many overlapping intersections a person has. I think if everybody could just promise themselves to remember that as soon as they notice more than one, that is every layer increases the vulnerability. You're right, it's not a competition. The Olympics, I hadn't heard that one before. I think it kind of goes back to that dividing and labeling and controlling part of our society. If we could all start to see every human on a sliding scale on every denominator, every intersection, sliding scale, and let people slide along that scale as they need, as they will, as they want. I think we would do a lot better with respecting humans. They are not static. No human is static. No matter how much somebody may claim they've always been the same and they're just like their father, or we learned from our grandparents, or humans are not static. And so if we could let everybody just stay in the flow of their own colors, whatever colors are on their flag, and remember that all it takes is respect. You don't have to like, you don't have to live with, you don't have to be friends with, but respect is what everyone deserves. no matter what their colors are.
I totally agree with what Jackson and Leslie just said. I would just add a couple of facts to that, and that in terms of hate crimes, gay males have the highest uptick in hate crimes right now. In terms of murders, Black transgender females, Cleveland has become the murder capital of the U.S. in terms of the number of murders of Black transgender females. And transgender are being picked on the most in terms of legislation. So those are just some things to keep in mind. The other interesting thing that isn't being written about at this point, but all of the youth serving organizations are communicating with each other. There's a high intersection between transgender and the autism spectrum. And so that's another challenge in the way those who have that dual diagnosis are dealing with being transgender is somewhat different than a transgender person without that dual diagnosis. So interestingly, most of the transgender youth coming out in middle school, coming out earlier, do have the autism spectrum disorder. They're more rigid, and they cannot even stand not to live authentically. And they are more willing to be picked on, and they're already, I hate to say this, but they're already somewhat on the fringe of the social strata, and so they don't have as much to lose. And most of the kids in our middle school group are falling on that autism spectrum. And they're really so darn cute. They're really cute kids, and really fun. But it's just an interesting phenomenon that we're learning more about.
Oh, there's so much more to learn.
Yes, there is.
Well,
Questions?
I was gonna say
last call.
Yeah.
I was gonna say on that note, like there's so much more to learn, and something I've realized is even being part of the queer community, I learn things every day, and I constantly aspire to continue learning things. And I think it's important for people who aren't part of the queer community to realize like we're also learning with you, and we're just starting from different places to some degree. But like I was born in Geauga County too. Well, not born in Geauga County, but I grew up here, and so I was exposed to the same things that my cisgender classmates were. And it just so happened that because my identity was different than theirs, I was exposed to different things later on, and that made me an entirely different person. And had my friends also been exposed to the same things, they would feel the same that I do in terms of what people they're comfortable around and the type of acceptance they're capable of.
Acceptance and respect. We'll get there.
Thank you for bringing us together, Jackson.
Well, I'm so glad to have you here. Got
Sorry.
one question?
One's a suggestion, and then there is a question. Chris, I would suggest another human library segment, or multiple ones throughout the day at Geauga Pride in Burton. I think this is a fantastic way. Like I said earlier, is I'm an ally, but there's a lot I don't understand, and I'm sometimes uncomfortable when I'm presented with that situation because I don't want to say the wrong thing, and even if I did, it wasn't out of the place of being wrong, but it's not something I grew up with. It's not in my daily lexicon. Pronouns I'm good with. I can handle those. And like Jackson just used the word cisgender. I know what that means now, but when people first started using, I'm like, well, what does that mean? I don't know am I cisgender? I had no idea. But I think this is a very valuable lesson for people to gain some confidence in saying, okay, now I feel a little bit better, and going and talking to different people that aren't like me, because nobody likes to speak in public because they don't want to say the wrong thing. Well, this situation is very similar, and so I think anytime we get a chance to discuss them openly and in a safe space where you're not going to be like, oh, hey, you said the wrong thing, you need to leave. We're all here for the same reason. So I think that would be a valuable thing that we could do at Jaga Pride. We have one coming up here in Chardon on June 17th, and then in Burton on June 24th. So I think that's a great opportunity to do that.
Well, it's always a goal of
25th, sorry.
25th, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
It's always a goal of our organization to do more community training. So we're willing and ready for whatever group, or just even putting it out there to the general community.
I would even suggest like a monthly coffee hour or something like that, or appetizer hour here at Element 41 in Chardon. A great host and great ally for the community, the unicorn in Jaga County, so to speak. But so my question, and you each can address this, is when I grew up, and Leslie and Chris, you guys are a little bit around my same age, the word queer was a slur, but now it's been embraced into that LGBTQ plus acronym. And can you explain why? I know the answer, but just for other people, can you explain why?
Well, I'll tell you what my thought is about it. I find, so let's just say, I don't go around, and we don't all go around saying to everyone, oh, I'm heterosexual, what are you? What goes on in your love life? That's personal information. So I find that adults in particular, the youth are kind of happy to say, oh yeah, I'm pansexual, but adults recognize that they have a right to their privacy, and to just use the word I'm part of the queer population identifies them. And Leslie, I probably shouldn't be saying this. You should be the one speaking about this. But this is my experience that I'm finding, is that it's a way to identify as being part of the population without having to give up all of your personal information. And I'm not really clear how the word queer got incorporated, and maybe somebody else knows that. Okay. But I know that it is kind of used as a general term to identify yourself without having to give away too much private information. And yes, I'm in my later 60s, and I'm now comfortable using that term, but it took me quite a while because it felt like I was putting people down. It was a very condescending term when I was growing up. So it's taken a lot of retraining for me to get comfortable.
So I guess to explain how it's become, let's say, a more acceptable term now and not a slur. I mean, I would still say it's probably used as a slur in some situations. It depends on how you use it, of course. But it's essentially been reclaimed by the queer community because they wanted to reclaim that narrative as saying, like, they use this as an offensive term, but now we can be like, yeah, that is what I am. Okay, what do you want me to do about it? Like, instead of them allowing people who are homophobic or transphobic or anything like that to use slurs against them, they're like, no, that's not a slur. That's like a thing that, like, queer is a good thing. And that's such an important, like, reclaiming of that narrative to say, well, what you once thought was a bad thing is a really good thing. So, and it kind of discourages people from using it as a slur anymore because they're like, oh, they like that term now. But I also say, like, I like to say that I'm part of the queer community because, well, one, it's a lot less of a mouthful to say. Yeah, yes. But I also like to, I think that it shows that I feel some sort of connection to people who are in the queer community but aren't gay. So I feel a certain type of connection with people who are transgender or non-binary or lesbian or bisexual. Like, I consider them part of my community, and it's about using that term as umbrella to say we're all together. Like, it's a collective instead of all these individuals.
I like that. That's good. Well, when did they chant, we're queer, we're here, get used to it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Jackson, you're right. I mean, any word can be used harshly or in a derogatory way. I'm not sure all of the reasons it came back. I do agree with you, Jackson, that when you say queer, it differentiates from heteronormativity, gender normativity, and then there's queer. But it still divides. We're all humans. But it does reflect the collective. The word I prefer is family with a capital F. But that's probably because I write a lot, and you just can't keep using all the letters, and I use the word queer too, and you just have to keep changing up the vocabulary so you don't keep repeating yourself. I think what's most important is that whoever you are, if you're part of the queer community, if you're part of the family, adopt the words that are most comfortable to you and stick by them. Don't feel like you have to use any words that make you uncomfortable, or you don't identify with, or you don't like. And some of that is age related. And some of it won't be at all. But if we're all going to be authentic, we have to be authentic in our language too. So, yeah, call it what you want.
And I would just like to clarify that the term SOGI in our name, sexual orientation, gender identity, is not a term that we coined. It was actually, that term was used in the healthcare field to identify people who identified as LGBTQ and needed maybe to be considered for certain medical issues. So if people want to use the term SOGI, they're not stealing it from us. We borrowed it from, it already existed. And I just kind of like it because to me it breaks down what we're talking about, and everyone has a sexual orientation and gender identity. So it kind of normalizes it that we all fall in the SOGI realm.
Okay, I kind of stumbled on the everyone part of has a sexual orientation and a gender identity, and there's also other factors like gender expression and sexuality and yeah. So again, whatever's comfortable, and let's let people slide around in all the different colors as much as we can.
Right.
I could go on all night asking questions, but
Yeah, it's been a good session.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for having us here.
let's do it more often.
Definitely.
All right.
Thank you.
Is that signing off then?
Yes.